Before swords rang against shields, before arrows turned the sky into a storm of death, warfare was brutally intimate. Victory belonged to those who could endure pain, summon courage, and stand their ground when fear clawed at the chest. Battles were decided by flesh, by muscle, bone, and willpower, and by fear. The invisible force that broke formations long before bodies fell. Every warrior knew this. Every man who stepped onto the battlefield understood that survival depended on speed, awareness, and the fragile confidence that he might be faster, stronger, or luckier than the one facing him. And then, on one forgotten Bronze Age morning, everything changed. The sun had barely risen when the two forces formed their lines. Dust clung to sandals and bare legs. Shields were raised, gripping hands slick with sweat long before the first blow would fall. Spears tilted forward like a forest of sharpened branches. The men whispered prayers not for glory, but for survival. They had fought before. They had seen blood soak into dry earth. Nothing about this moment felt new. Until he appeared. At first, there was confusion rather than fear. A murmur rippled through the ranks. Men leaned forward, squinting through the haze of dust and heat. Something moved on the opposing side slowly, deliberately. Not running, not hiding behind a shield. Walking forward as if the battlefield itself posed no threat. Then the light caught him. Bronze reflected the sun in harsh, blinding flashes. Plates overlapped from neck to thigh, rigid and unnatural, moving as one solid mass. His shoulders were capped in metal. His chest was sealed behind thick bronze slabs. Even his throat, always exposed, always vulnerable, was locked behind a high collar of gleaming armor. Where flesh should have been visible, there was only metal. The men froze. This was not how warriors looked. Armor was supposed to cover parts of the body, not consume it. Helmets, shields, greaves, these were familiar. But this figure seemed transformed, less man, more construct. A walking fortress, advancing step by heavy step. A spear was thrown. It struck the bronze chest and skidded away, clattering uselessly onto the ground. Another followed, and another. Eash fele. The sound of impact metal striking metal cut through the battlefield like a curse. There was no cry of pain, no stumble. The figure did not slow. He did not raise a shield. He simply kept walking. Fear arrived then, not the sharp fear of imminent death, but something colder, deeper. The kind that makes men question reality itself. Weapons were meant to work. Spears were meant to pierce. Arrows were meant to kill. When those truths failed, so did the confidence built upon them. Whispers spread. Some spoke of gods, others of monsters. A few simply stared, unable to reconcile what they were seeing with everything they knew about war. This was the Dendra panoply. In an age where survival depended on mobility and endurance, this armor defied expectation. It did not prioritize speed. It did not rely on evasion. It dared the enemy to strike and then denied them the satisfaction of blood. The psychological impact was immediate. Men hesitated. Arme falte raide. A line that should have surged forward held back instead, unsure whether advancing meant certain death. Warre benenis, an exchange blow for blow. Risque for risque, but this entirely an imbalance. The armored warrior raised his weapon not in a dramatic gesture, but with mechanical certainty. Awareness struck, retaliation. Blades glanced off his body. Slashing attacks met bronze instead of flesh. Arrows snapped or flattened, robbed of their deadly purpose. The enemy could hurt him only if they could first believe he was still human, and that belief was slipping away. Armor had always been defensive, a second skin meant to reduce injury. But here, it became something more. It became a message, a declaration. This was not merely protection, it was dominance made visible. The Dendra panoply turned survival into spectacle. It told the enemy, without words, that their strength was insufficient, their weapons outdated, their courage meaningless. Men broke not because they were wounded, but because they were undone. Stories would spread after battles like this. Not accurate, one's fear never preserves truth but powerful ones. Tales of bronze giants, of warriors immune to steel, of kings who could not be killed. In societies where oral memory shaped reality, such stories mattered as much as victory itself. The armor became myth the moment it entered combat, and myths are weapons. They travel faster than armies. They arrive before the first spear is raised. A warrior who believes his enemy cannot be killed has already lost half the battle. The Dendra panoply exploited this perfectly. Even if it was worn by only one man, its presence echoed far beyond the field. Yet there was something unsettling even for those who stood beside the armored figure. He moved differently, slower, more deliberate. Where others shifted their weight constantly, conserving energy, he advanced in straight lines, turning required effort. Every step seemed calculated. His breathing was hidden behind bronze, but it was there heavy, labored, human. Because beneath the armor, he was still a man, and the armor demanded payment. Heat built quickly. Bronze trapped warmth, turned the sun into an enemy. Sweat pooled beneath the plates, unseen but relentless. Each movement consumed strength. Each moment prolonged the burden. The panoply offered near invulnerability, but only for a time. Yet, in that critical opening clash when morale was fragile and fear decisive, that time was enough. The battlefield had changed, not because of technology alone, but because of perception. Warfare was no longer just about who struck harder or faster. It was about who could reshape the enemy's understanding of reality. The Dendra panoply did exactly that. It asked a terrifying question: what if you cannot hurt me? And in the Bronze Age, where weapons were trusted absolutely, that question was devastating. Long after the clash ended, survivors would remember the sound of metal on bronze, the way their weapons failed them, the way a man became something else before their eyes. They would remember the moment fear overtook reason, the moment courage faltered, the moment the battlefield changed. Because from that day forward, armor was no longer just protection, it was power, and the world of warfare would never look the same again. For more than 3,000 years, the Dendra panoply lay in silence. No songs preserved it, no epics praised it, no myths warned of its power. While empires rose and collapsed, while languages evolved and faiths replaced one another, the bronze plates rested beneath the earth, darkened by time and sealed in soil. The world forgot the hands that forged them, the body that once carried their weight, and the battlefield where their presence changed the course of fear itself. Then, in the middle of the 20th century, silence broke. In the early 1960s, archaeologists were excavating near the small village of Dendra in southern Greece, not far from the ancient center of Mycenaean power. The landscape was unassuming rolling earth, dry grass, and the faint traces of stone structures long reduced to memory. The team expected routine discoveries, pottery fragments, simple weapons, perhaps the remains of a tomb. Nothing suggested they were about to confront one of the most startling military artifacts ever uncovered. The first bronze plate appeared like many others before it corroded, incomplete, heavy with age. At first glance, it was catalogued as a typical fragment of armor, another piece of the familiar Bronze Age puzzle. But then another plate emerged, and another. Each was thicker than expected, larger, shaped with a precision that hinted at deliberate design rather than decorative flourish. As excavation continued, a pattern began to form. These were not random fragments scattered by time. They belonged together. The realization unfolded slowly, almost reluctantly. Archaeologists are trained to resist imagination, to distrust coincidence, but the evidence grew undeniable. The plates aligned, their curves matched. Hinges and rivet holes suggested articulation. This was not a single breastplate or helmet, it was a system. Piece by piece, the soil yielded its secret. What emerged stunned everyone present. The armor was nearly complete. Greaves, shoulder guards, chest plates, écollets. The sheer extent of coverage defied every assumption about Bronze Age warfare. No society of that era was believed capable of producing such a fully enclosed suit of armor. The prevailing view held that ancient warriors relied on mobility and minimal protection. Heavy, full-body armor was thought to be a much later innovation. The ground at Dendra disagreed. As the armor was carefully removed and transported for study, disbelief rippled through the academic world. Scholars examined the plates, measured their thickness, traced their edges. The bronze was expertly worked, hammered, shaped, and fitted with an understanding of human anatomy that suggested advanced experimentation. This was not ceremonial armor. This was built to be worn, to move, to fight. And that realization shook the foundations of Bronze Age studies. For decades, historians had drawn a clear line between ancient and later warfare. The Bronze Tebelived lacked the resources, organization, and technical knowledge required for such complex military equipment. The Dendra panoply erased that line in a single discovery. It forced scholars to confront an uncomfortable truth. Ancient societies were not as limited as modern assumptions had made them. Reassembling the panoply was an act of revelation. As conservators fitted the plates together, the armor transformed from a collection of artifacts into something disturbingly tangible. This was no longer an abstract object behind glass. It had shape, presence, weight. When fully assembled, it resembled not ancient gear, but something closer to medieval or even modern protective equipment. The reaction was visceral. How had this been possible? Where did the bronze come from? Who funded its creation? And perhaps most unsettling of all, why was there only one? Questions multiplied faster than answers. The armor's completeness suggested careful burial, perhaps in a tomb belonging to an elite individual, a warrior of immense status, a king, a champion, someone important enough to be sealed with an object that required extraordinary resources to create. But importance alone could not explain its existence. Bronze was expensive. Copper and tin had to be sourced, often from distant regions. Skilled artisans were required to shape and assemble the plates. Time, labor, and expertise converged in this single suit. This was not a casual experiment. It was a deliberate investment. The discovery forced historians to reconsider not only technology, but intention. Why build such armor in an age where mobility ruled? Why encase a man in bronze when speed and endurance determined survival? The panoply suggested a different philosophy of warfare, one that valued shock, intimidation, and invulnerability over agility. It hinted at tactical experimentation long before such concepts were believed to exist. As debates unfolded, one thing became clear: the Dendra panoply was an anomaly. No other armor like it had been found. No widespread tradition followed it. This made it even more unsettling. If ancient societies could build this, why didn't they continue? Was it too expensive? Too impractical? Or did it serve a purpose so specific that it never needed repetition? Each theory revealed as much about modern bias as ancient reality. For many scholars, the panoply was an uncomfortable object. It refused to fit neatly into established narratives. It challenged the idea that technological progress followed a simple upward curve. Instead, it suggested experimentation, ambition, and even excess qualities often reserved for later civilizations. The armor became a mirror reflecting the limits of historical imagination. As research continued, reconstructions were attempted. When modern researchers donned replicas, they felt the truth of the artifact in their own bodies, the weight, the restriction, ziyat. Suddenly, the panoply was no longer a mystery locked in the past, it was a lived experience. And that experience raised new questions. Perhaps the armor was not meant for prolonged battle. Perhaps it was designed for moments brief, decisive clashes where fear mattered more than stamina. Or perhaps it was a symbol first and a weapon second, meant to embody power rather than practicality. The discovery at Dendra did not provide answers. It dismantled assumptions. By emerging from the earth nearly intact, the panoply forced historians to acknowledge a deeper truth. Ancient societies were capable of extraordinary innovation, even when that innovation led down paths they would later abandon. Progress was not linear. It was experimental, risky, human. Today, the Dendra panoply stands as a reminder that silence does not mean absence, that the past still holds secrets capable of unsettling the present, and that sometimes, buried beneath centuries of earth, lies not a relic of limitation but evidence of forgotten ambition. Unearthed from silence, the armor spoke. And what it said continues to challenge everything we thought we knew. To understand the Dendra panoply, one must first step into the world that demanded its existence, a world where power was not inherited quietly, but seized, defended, and displayed in metal and blood. Mycenaean Greece was not a peaceful cradle of early civilization. It was a land hardened by rivalry, scarcity, and ambition, where the line between ruler and warrior barely existed. and survival depended on the ability to dominate others before they dominated you. This was a landscape of stone and fire. Across the hills of mainland, Greece rose fortified palaces Mycenae. Tiryns, pylosiege crowned, with massive cyclopean walls so thick later generations believed giants must have built them. These were not mere residences. They were centers of power, storehouses of wealth, and symbols meant to intimidate. Their gates framed authority in stone, announcing to all who approached that this was a world ruled by force. Inside these walls lived a warrior aristocracy. Kings were not distant administrators. They were commanders, charioteers, and symbols of martial strength. Authority flowed downward through loyalty, not law. A leader proved his right to rule through conquest, plunder, and the ability to protect his followers. Peace was temporary. Conflict was constant. And at the heart of that conflict was bronze. Bronze was more than a material, it was power made tangible. The ability to acquire, shape, and control bronze determined who ruled and who served. Copper came from one place, tin from another, often hundreds or thousands of miles away. Securing these resources required trade, diplomacy, and, when necessary, violence. Mycenaean palaces were nodes in a vast network stretching across the Aegean, Anatolia, and beyond. Whoever controlled bronze controlled war. Weapons defined status as much as utility. Swords, spears, and armor were not evenly distributed. The best equipment belonged to elite men whose appearance on the battlefield was meant to inspire loyalty among allies and fear among enemies. Warfare was not anonymous, it was personal. You fought knowing who led you, who faced you, and what they represented. Chariots thundered across plains, carrying nobles who fought as much to be seen as to strike. These vehicles were expensive, fragile, and tactically limited, yet they persisted because they symbolized dominance. To ride a chariot into battle was to declare wealth, organization, and authority. It was a moving display of power. The dendra panoply belongs in this world of spectacle and status. It did not emerge from necessity alone. It emerged from competition between kings, between palaces, between visions of what power should look like. In a society obsessed with visible dominance, armor was not merely protection, it was identity. To be encased in bronze was to embody the resources, craftsmanship, and reach of an entire kingdom. Violence permeated Mycenaean life. Grave goods reveal swords laid beside the dead, daggers inlaid with gold, armor buried as symbols of prestige. Evenindeat were defied. Children grew up surrounded by the language of conflict, taught that strength ensured survival and weakness invited destruction. Yet this was not chaos, it was structured violence. Palace records, preserved on clay tablets, show careful organization rationing food, managing labor, distributing weapons. War was planned, resources were counted. Artisans were specialized. The Mycenaeans understood logistics, supply and production in ways that challenge modern assumptions about ancient complexity. The dendra panoply reflects this sophistication. Its construction required not just metal, but planning. Artisans had to understand anatomy, movement, and stress. They had to test ideas, refine designs, and accept failure along the way. This was experimentation, not accident. The armor suggests a society willing to push boundaries, even at great cost. Why? Because Mycenaean Greece rewarded excess. Status was displayed through accumulation of land, cattle, gold, and bronze. Leaders competed not just to win battles, but to appear invincible. A warrior encased in bronze sent a message far beyond physical protection. It declared that his palace commanded resources others could not match. It announced technological superiority as a form of psychological warfare. Enemies did not merely fight a man, they fought his entire system. And that system thrived on comparison. Mycenaean rulers measured themselves against rivals near and far. Contacts with Minoan Crete, Anatolia, and Egypt exposed them to new ideas, new technologies, and new forms of display. Innovation spread through imitation and adaptation. The panoply may have drawn inspiration from multiple traditions, refined into something uniquely extreme. Yet, Mycenaean Greece was also fragile. Despite its power, it relied on delicate networks of trade and loyalty. Disruption meant collapse. A failed harvest, a broken alliance, or a lost trade route could unravel a kingdom. In such a world, displays of strength mattered immensely. Deterrence could prevent conflict. Intimidation could preserve stability. The Dendra panoply fits this logic perfectly. It was not designed for mass warfare. It was designed for moments decisive encounters where perception outweighed endurance. A single armored figure could turn the tide by breaking morale, by convincing the enemy that resistance was futile. But ambition carries risk. The same culture that forged the panoply also sowed the seeds of its disappearance. Overextension, resource strain, and rigid hierarchies made Mycenaean Greece vulnerable. When collapse came around 1200 BCE, it was swift and devastating. Palaces burned, trade networks fractured, specialized craftsmanship vanished, and with it, the world that could produce armor like the Dendra panoply. What remains is evidence of a civilization unafraid to push beyond practicality in pursuit of dominance, a society that believed power should be seen, not hidden, that believed technology was as much about intimidation as efficiency. The Dendra panoply was not an accident of history. It was the logical outcome of a world forged in bronze and blood, a world where survival depended not just on fighting well, but on convincing others that you could not be defeated. In understanding Mycenaean Greece, we understand the armor. And in understanding the armor, we glimpse the ambitions, fears, and brilliance of a civilization that dared to turn warfare into spectacle and a warrior into a monument. When the Dendra panoply is viewed not as a relic, but as a construction, its true nature becomes clear. This was not armor assembled hastily to ward off blades. It was a system deliberate, calculated, and unforgiving. Every plate, hinge, and strap reveals a mind at work, one that understood the human body and was willing to push it to its breaking point in exchange for near-total protection. The panoply does not begin with decoration. It begins with structure. At its core lies a foundation of leather, now long perished, but once essential. This organic layer served as both support and buffer, allowing rigid bronze plates to sit against the body without tearing flesh apart. Leather absorbed shock, distributed weight, and acted as the flexible spine of an otherwise unyielding shell. Without it, the armor would have been unwearable. With it, the armor became something closer to a second skeleton. Onto this foundation were mounted the bronze plates, thick, heavy, and meticulously shaped. Unlike later armor forged from iron or steel, bronze demanded different techniques. It could not be bent endlessly without cracking. Each piece had to be hammered, shaped, and annealed with precision. The craftsman had to anticipate not just the form of the human body, but how it moved under stress. The chest plates formed the heart of the system. Broad and imposing, they overlapped vertically, creating layered protection over the torso. This design was no accident. Overlapping plates allowed force to be deflected rather than absorbed directly. A spear, thrust that struck at an angle, would slide rather than pierce. A sword blow would glance off, robbed of its momentum. The abdomen, often left vulnerable in ancient armor, was sealed behind bronze. This alone marked the panoply as extraordinary. Most Bronze Age warriors relied on shields to protect their midsection. The Dendra panoply assumed the shield might fail or be unnecessary. It trusted metal instead. Above the chest rose the collar. Tall, rigid, and enclosing, it protected the throat and neck areas usually left exposed for the sake of mobility. In battle, a single cut to the neck meant death. The panoply refused to accept that risk. The collar transformed the most fragile part of the body into one of the most defended, but the cost was immediate. Turning the head became restricted, awareness narrowed. The wearer had to move his entire body to change his field of vision. Below, the armor extended downward into articulated sections that guarded the hips and thighs. These plates were shaped to allow limited walking and stepping, but not running. Each movement required intention. There was no room for panic. The wearer could not react instinctively. He had to commit to every action, knowing he could not retreat quickly if he misjudged. The shoulders were capped with heavy guards that curved outward, protecting joints without fully locking them. This was a crucial compromise. The arms had to move, weapon control demanded it. The designers allowed just enough freedom to strike, thrust, and parry, buter vener, protection war. The shoulder guards added bulk, making the wearer broader, larger, more imposing. This armor did not aim to make a man agile. It aimed to make him inevitable. The arms themselves were less encased than the torso, revealing a clear hierarchy of protection. Vital organs mattered more than limbs. If an arm was injured, the warrior might still survive. If the chest was pierced, the battle was over. The panoply reflects this brutal calculus. Then there were the greaves. These protected the lower legs, shielding bone and muscle from cuts meant to cripple. In Bronze Age combat, disabling an enemy was often enough. A wounded leg removed a man from battle as surely as death. The panoply denied that option. It assumed the enemy would target weakness and removed it piece by piece. When assembled fully, the armor enclosed the body in bronze from neck to shin. Only the hands, feet, and parts of the arms remained exposed. The result was something closer to a mechanical construct than traditional armor. The wearer did not simply put it on, he inhabited it, but every layer added weight. Modern reconstructions estimate the full panoply weighed over 30 kilograms, and that weight was not evenly distributed. It pressed down on shoulders, hips, and spine. Each step transferred force through joints already strained by rigid plates. Over time, fatigue became inevitable. This is where the brilliance and the danger of the design emerges. The creators of the panoply were not ignorant of these limitations. They did not accidentally build armor that restricted movement. They chose to ever compromise protection over endurance. This suggests the armor was intended for specific condition-short engagements, controlled environments, or moments where intimidation outweighed prolonged combat. The panoply was not meant for skirmishing. It was meant for confrontation. Intisas war machine, not because it lacked humanity, but because it redefined it. The man inside became a delivery system for force. He advanced steadily. He absorbed blows. He broke formations through presence alone. The armor turned flesh into infrastructure. Yet, the machine still required a human core. Heat built quickly beneath the bronze. Sweat soaked the leather foundation. Breathing became laborious. Each minute drained strength faster than an armored combat ever could. The wearer had to be physically exceptional, trained not just to fight, but to endure suffocation and exhaustion. This raises an unsettling possibility. The panoply may not have been designed for many men. It may have been designed for one. An elite warrior selected not only for skill, but for stamina and mental discipline. Someone capable of suppressing panic as the armor closed around him. Someone trained to move deliberately, strike decisively, and withdraw before the cost became fatal. In that sense, the armor shaped the warrior as the warrior wore the armor. Every design choice reveals intention. Nothing is decorative. Nothing is wasted. This was not a ceremonial object meant to glitter in sunlight. It was a functional system designed to dominate a battlefield for a brief, terrifying window of time. And that is what makes it extraordinary. The Dendra panoply represents a moment when ancient engineers asked not, what is practical, but what is possible. They pushed beyond convention, beyond comfort, beyond balance. They explored the extreme edge of protection, fully aware of the consequences. The result was not evolution but revelation. It showed how far technology could go before human limits intervened. It demonstrated that armor could approach invulnerability, but only at the cost of freedom. It revealed the eternal tension between protection and movement, a dilemma that would echo through centuries of military design. In the end, the panoply stands as a testament not to perfection, but to ambition. An ancient war, machine built by hands that understood exactly what they were doing and dared to do it anyway. Not because it was easy, but because it was possible. Invincibility is a tempting illusion. On paper, the Dendra panoply appears to offer it layer upon layer of bronze, carefully arranged to deny blades, spears, and arrows their purpose. Yet armor does not fight battles. Bodies do, and when modern researchers began to recreate and wear the panoply, the truth emerged with brutal clarity. Protection does not erase human limits. It magnifies them. The first sensation reported by those who step into a reconstructed panoply is not confidence, it is weight. The armor settles onto the body like a physical verdict. More than 30 kilograms of bronze pressed down on shoulders, hips, and spine, unlike modern gear designed to distribute load evenly. The panoply concentrates mass where the human frame is least forgiving. The body compensates, instinctively leaning, bracing, tightening muscles just to remain upright. Even standing still becomes an act of effort. Movement follows slowly. Each step demands intention. The legs lift not only themselves, but the bronze bound to them. The hips resist. The knees protest. Momentum becomes difficult to manage. Because once motion begins, stopping is just as exhausting as continuing. The armor does not forgive missteps. A stumble risks collapse, and recovery requires precious energy. Turning is worse. The high collar restricts head movement, forcing the wearer to rotate the entire torso to see. Peripheral vision narrows. Awareness diminishes. In a battlefield defined by chaos, this is a dangerous sacrifice. Ancient warriors relied on instinct and rapid reaction. The panoply replaces both with commitment. Once a direction is chosen, it must be followed through. Then comes the heat. Bronze does not breathe. Leather traps warmth. Within minutes, the temperature inside the armor begins to rise. Sweat forms quickly, soaking the underlayers, offering no relief. The sun becomes an adversary. Even in mild conditions, heat builds faster than the body can dissipate it. Modern testers report a creeping suffocation. Breathing grows heavier. The chest plates restrict expansion. The weight compresses the rib cage. Each breath feels shallower than the last. The heart accelerates, not from exertion alone, but from the body's attempt to cool itself. Fatigue arrives early, uninvited, and relentless. This is the cost of total protection. The Dendra panoply denies the enemy access to flesh, but it also denies the wearer access to comfort. Every advantage has a counterweight. Every layer of bronze adds minutes to survival while subtracting minutes from endurance. Time becomes the true enemy. Experimental archaeology has made this painfully clear. In controlled tests, wearers can fight effectively for short periods. Minutes, not hours, they can advance. They can strike. They can absorb blows with confidence unmatched by lighter armor. But as time passes, the body begins to fail, muscles burn. Coordination slips, reaction time slows. Annexless, une ligue one blocked by armor. Unlike fear, it cannot be ignored indefinitely. When the body does no amount compensate, the wearer becomes vulnerable not because the armor fails, but because the human inside does. This reality reframes the panoply entirely. It was not designed for prolonged warfare. It was not meant for drawn-out engagements or running battles. It was designed for moments critical, terrifying moments when dominance mattered more than longevity. The panoply excels in the opening phase of combat, when morale is fragile and shock decisive. But if that moment passes, the balance shifts. A heavily armored warrior facing multiple opponents must end the fight quickly or risk being surrounded. Mobility becomes survival. The ability to withdraw, reposition, or pursue is limited. In open terrain, lighter warriors could outlast the bronze giant, striking when fatigue finally undermined his defenses. The panoply demands a specific kind of discipline. The wearer must know when to engage and when to retreat. He must resist the illusion of invulnerability. Overconfidence is deadly. The armor can protect against weapons, but not against poor judgment. A single mistake can overextension, a misstep, a moment of panic can turn strength into liability. This raises a fundamental question: can armor be too protective? The Dendra panoply suggests that yes, it can. In pushing protection to its extreme, the designers encountered the immovable barrier of human physiology. Muscles tire. Joints très whelms. No material, however advanced, can change that. The panoply did not fail because it was flawed. It failed because it asked the human body to perform beyond sustainable limits. And yet, this does not make it foolish. The armor reflects a calculated gamble. Its creators understood the trade-offs. They accepted them. They bet that fear, shock, and early dominance would outweigh the risks of exhaustion. In specific contexts, elite combat, chariot warfare, defensive engagements, the gamble may have paid off. Modern soldiers face similar dilemmas. Even today, body armor is a balance between protection and mobility. Add too much weight, and soldiers tire faster, react slower, and suffer higher injury rates. Remove too much, and survivability drops. The problem has not changed in 3,000 years. Only the materials have. The Dendra panoply stands at one extreme of this spectrum. It represents a moment when ancient engineers prioritized invulnerability over versatility. They explored the upper boundary of what armor could do, knowing full well it could not be worn indefinitely. In doing so, they revealed the limits not of technology, but of humanity. The wearer of the panoply was not meant to be everywhere. He was meant to be decisive. His presence alone could break morale. His advance could shatter formations. His survival through the opening clash could turn the tide. But time was always against him. The longer the battle lasted, the more the advantage eroded. Sweat became weakness. Weight became burden. The armor that once made him unstoppable began to imprison him. This is the paradox at the heart of the Dendra panoply. Étoffer brief. It transforms a man into a fortress temporarily, and then it reminds us of a truth as old as warfare itself. No matter how advanced the weapon, the human body remains the final limiting factor. In the end, the panoply does not represent failure. It represents a question asked thousands of years before modern science could answer it. How much protection is too much? Where does strength end and vulnerability begin? The Dendra panoply answers not with theory, but with experience. It tells us that invincibility has a cost, and the body always pays it. Legends thrive on stillness. Combat does not. In stories, a warrior stands alone, impervious, blades shattering against his armor as enemies fall one by one. The Dendra panoply seems born for such tales. A suit of bronze so completed invites myth. But real Bronze Age battlefields were not stages for heroic poses. They were loud, fluid, and merciless. Victory belonged not to the strongest object, but to the force that adapted fastest to chaos. To understand the panoply's true place in warfare, it must be dragged out of legend and thrust into the noise, dust, and confusion of actual combat. Bronze Age warfare began with contact but rarely ended with it. Lines advanced, collided, buckled, and reformed. Spears jabbed in crowded spaces. Swords slashed when formations collapsed. Arrows fell unpredictably. Men tripped over bodies, lost weapons, panicked, fled, rallied, and charged again. In this environment, the first exchange mattered, but so did what came after. Against individual weapons, the Dendra panoply was formidable. A spear thrust aimed at the chest would strike bronze and slide away. A sword slash would ring uselessly off the plates. Even arrows lethal against lightly armored, foes would struggle to penetrate the thick metal, especially at oblique angles. In the opening moments of battle, the panoply likely rendered its wearer nearly untouchable. Dat matured. The initial clash often decided morale. If one side broke early, casualties stayed low. If it held, the fight escalated into prolonged brutality. A single warrior who could advance without fear, absorb blows without injury, and remain standing amid chaos could shatter confidence. Enemies might hesitate, lines might falter. But battles rarely ended there. As the fight dragged on, the environment turned hostile, not just from enemy weapons, but from exhaustion, disorientation, and the press of bodies. This is where myth begins to unravel. The panoply restricted speed. In dense infantry combat, speed was survival. Being able to sidestep, pivot, or retreat could mean the difference between life and death. A heavily armored warrior could hold ground, but struggled to exploit breakthroughs or safe encirclement, even vulnerability relevant. A man does not need to be pierced to be overwhelmed. And then there was endurance. Bronze Age battles could last hours. Not continuous fighting bursts of violence separated by moments of regrouping, but the strain never stopped. The panoply's advantages diminished with every passing minute. Sweat soaked the underlayers. Muscles trembled. Reaction times slowed. The armor that had once denied blows now amplified fatigue. Against fresh opponents, the balance shifted. This suggests that the panoply was ill-suited for prolonged infantry engagements. Not useless, but specialized. It excelled at the beginning, not the end, at shock, not attrition, at breaking morale, not grinding it down. So where did it truly belong? One compelling answer lies with chariot warfare. Chariots were central to elite Mycenaean combat. They were not tanks in the modern sense, but mobile platforms that allowed warriors to move quickly across the battlefield, engage briefly, and withdraw. In this context, the panoply makes sense. A heavily armored warrior could dismount to fight at decisive moments, protected from missiles and close combat, then retreat to the chariot before exhaustion took hold. In confined spaces, where maneuvering is limited and frontal assaults dominate, the panoply would be devastating. Spears would fail, swords would glance off. The wearer could anchor a position, absorbing attacks, while allies maneuvered around him. In such scenarios, endurance mattered less than presence. The dendra panoply may not have been meant for frequent use. It may have been deployed sparingly, at moments when visibility mattered more than efficiency. A king appearing encased in bronze before battle sent a message long before fighting began. It declared wealth, power, and divine favor. It told enemies that this army commanded resources and technology beyond their reach. In Bronze Age societies, perception was reality. Battles were as much psychological contests as physical ones. Fear broke armies faster than wounds. A warrior who appeared invulnerable could undermine morale before the first spear was thrown. Pintat sens, pagaluvenits. This does not diminish its martial value. Symbols matter in war. They always have. Standards, banners, uniforms all exist to shape belief. The panoply did the same, but with terrifying immediacy. It did not wave in the wind. It walked forward. Still needed restraint. Without these, invincibility turned into isolation. If it had been universally effective, it would have spread. Modern reconstructions reinforce this view. Testers report feeling dominant in short engagements and overwhelmed in extended ones. And battlefields are never controlled for long. This is where myth must give way to nuance. The dendra panoply was not a miracle. It did not make its wearer unstoppable in all circumstances. But neither was it folly. It represented a strategic, experimental attempt to tilt the balance of combat through protection, intimidation, and selective engagement. In the end, the battlefield judged it honestly. The panoply worked briefly, spectacularly, and at great cost. It dominated moments, not wars. It shaped perception, not logistics. It belonged to a world where individual presence could still influence outcomes, before mass armies and standardized equipment erased such extremes. The myth of the bronze giant survives because it contains truth. The reality is more complex. The dendra panoply was neither fantasy nor failure. It was a weapon tuned to a specific rhythm of war, a rhythm defined by shock, status, and decisive confrontation. When the tempo changed, when endurance and flexibility took over, the armor fell silent, and so it remains a paradox, a sort of arnafuzed Weasley, a symbol that could break arm as if believed. A masterpiece that revealed the limits of the greatest protection. Battlefield, me t'inspire. But reality decides. War has always been fought with weapons, but it has never been won without resources. Behind every spear stood a miner. Behind every sword, a smelter. Behind every armored warrior, an entire economy strained to its limits. the dendra panoply, for all its brilliance on the battlefield, was ultimately a creation of wealth and a burden only the powerful could afford to carry. Armor like this was never meant to equip armies. It was meant to announce power. Bronze was the lifeblood of Mycenaean warfare, but it was also its greatest constraint. Unlike iron, bronze did not exist ready-made in the earth. It had to be created painstakingly by combining copper and tin. Copper was available in parts of Greece and Cyprus. Tin was not. It came from distant lands, carried across dangerous seas and unstable trade routes. Every shipment represented risk, diplomacy, and expense. Control of bronze meant control of war. Palace elites guarded this control fiercely. Clay tablets reveal centralized systems that tracked metal down to the smallest unit. Bronze was rationed, allocated, and reclaimed. Broken weapons were melted down. Old armor was reforged. Nothing was wasted because nothing could be replaced easily. Against this backdrop, the dendra panoply stands out as an act of extraordinary consumption. The amount of bronze required to create a single full-body suit was immense. This was not one breastplate or a helmet, it was dozens of thick plates, each shaped, finished, and fitted by skilled hands. The raw material alone represented months, perhaps years, of resource accumulation. The labor multiplied the cost further. These were not village craftsmen hammering out tools in spare moments. They were specialist metalworkers trained in shaping bronze without cracking it, in annealing and hammering repeatedly, in understanding stress and movement. Their time was valuable, their skills rare. Every hour spent on the panoply was an hour not spent producing weapons for other warriors. The panoply was not efficient, and efficiency is the currency of war. To equip even a small unit with such armor would have been impossible. The Mycenaean economy could support a handful of elite warriors clad in bronze, but not armies. Spears, shields, and simpler armor provided better returns on investment. They could be produced faster, repaired more easily, and distributed widely. The panoply broke this logic. It concentrated wealth onto a single body. This concentration was not accidental. In Mycenaean society, power flowed downward from the elite. Kings and nobles distinguished themselves not just through command, but through display. Their weapons were finer, their armor heavier, their graves richer. Status had to be seen to be believed. The dendra panoply fit perfectly into this worldview. A warrior encased in bronze embodied the wealth of his palace. Every plate announced access to distant trade networks. Every hinge testified to skilled labor under elite control. The armor was a walking inventory of power, proclaiming that its wearer and, by extension, his ruler stood above ordinary men. This is where economics and psychology intersect. The panoply's value was not limited to combat effectiveness. Its presence communicated dominance long before battle began. An enemy who saw such armor knew he faced a force capable of extraordinary expenditure. That knowledge alone could shape decisions whether to fight, retreat, or negotiate. But prestige is expensive to maintain. Bronze armor does not care for itself. Plates dent. Angelou's leather case. After every use, the panoply would have required careful inspection and repair by the same skilled craftsman who built it. This was not equipment a warrior could maintain. in the field. It tied its wearer to a logistical tale of artisans, supplies, and infrastructure. Transport was another burden. Moving the panoply across rough terrain required carts, animals, or ships. It was heavy, awkward, and valuable, an object worth protecting even when not worn. Losing it would have been more than a tactical setback. It would have been an economic and symbolic disaster. These realities reveal why the panoply never became standard. Armies thrive on repeatability. Weapons must be replaceable. Armor must be scalable. Training must be transferable. The Dendra panoply defied all of these principles. It was bespoke, singular, irreplaceable. In modern terms, it was a prototype, not a production model. And like many prototypes, it demonstrated what was possible, not what was sustainable. This leads to an uncomfortable conclusion. The panoply may represent not military evolution, but elite excess, a moment when ambition outpaced practicality. That does not mean it was useless. Excess has purpose in hierarchical societies. It reinforces boundaries. It legitimizes authority. It turns power into spectacle. The panoply may have functioned as much in ceremonies, parades, and symbolic appearances as it did in battle. Its very existence reinforced the social order that produced it. Yet, excess carries risk. By tying power so closely to concentrated wealth and specialized production, Mycenaean societies made themselves vulnerable. When trade routes collapsed, when resources dried up, the disappearance of the panoply mirrors the fate of the world that created it. After the Bronze Age collapse, full-body bronze armor does not reappear. Economies fragmented, trade networks shrank. The panoply had no place in that new reality. And yet, its existence lingers as evidence of a different logic of war won, where power was concentrated, displayed, and embodied by individuals rather than institutions. A logic where the battlefield was not just a place of violence, but a stage for political theater. In essence, the drapepli weapon of precious protection. It protected its wearer from blades, but protected its creator's status even more. It told subjects that their ruler commanded the impossible. It told enemies that resistance was costly. It told history that this society valued dominance enough to pour its wealth into bronze and strap it onto a single human frame. The economics of war ultimately decide which technologies endure. The panoply did not fail because it was ineffective. It failed because it was unsustainable. It asked too much from an economy that could not reproduce it widely. It concentrated too much value into too narrow a role. But for a brief moment long enough to leave its mark, it succeeded. It turned wealth into armor, armor into power, power into legend. Victory belongs not just to those who fight best, but to those who can afford to fight at all. The Dendra panoply was not the future of warfare. It was the price of power paid in bronze. When the last hammer fell silent and the final bronze plate cooled, the creators of the Dendra panoply may have believed they were shaping the future of warfare. In its gleaming surface lay ambition, mastery, and confidence, proof that human ingenuity could turn a warrior into a fortress. And yet, history offers a quieter, more unsettling verdict. The panoply did not become the standard. It did not evolve, spread, or endure. Instead, it vanished, leaving behind a question that still echoes across centuries. Was this the pinnacle of ancient armor or a magnificent dead end? Progress is often imagined as a straight path, a steady march toward improvement, but the past tells a different story. Innovation does not always survive. Sometimes it overshoots. Sometimes it reveals limits rather than possibilities. The Dendra panoply stands precisely at that crossroads where technological daring collided with human reality. After een brief moment kamer more flexibel more adaptable. Linen cuirasse, and Pashabrand pretended far longer than full-body metal shells. These designs struck a balance between defense and movement, protection and endurance. They were not invulnerable, but they were usable. That balance mattered more than perfection. The panoply asked too much of its wearer. It assumed that protection alone could dominate battle, overlooking the importance of stamina, coordination, and adaptability. Warfare, however, rewards systems that can function under stress, not just at their strongest moment, but throughout prolonged uncertainty. Simpler armor survived because it respected the human body instead of challenging it. This does not diminish the panoply's brilliance. On the contrary, its failure to endure makes it more revealing. It exposes the boundary where innovation ceases to be useful and becomes experimental. It shows us that technological advancement is not only about what can be built but about what can be sustained. Ancient societies understood this instinctively, even if they could not articulate it in modern terms. When a design proved too costly, too exhausting, or too rigid, it was abandoned. Survival demanded adaptability. The panoply, magnificent as it was, lacked that flexibility. And yet, its disappearance was not immediate condemnation. For a time, the Dendra panoply worked. It protected its wearer. It inspired fear. It demonstrated power. These are not trivial achievements. In the short term, it likely delivered exactly what its creators intended: a decisive advantage in specific moments. A visible assertion of dominance, a technological statement unmatched by rivals. But warfare is not won by moments alone. Over time, societies learned that effectiveness lay not in extremes, but in systems that could be replicated, repaired, and relied upon by many. Armies replaced champions. Logistics replaced spectacle. The future of warfare belonged to coordination, not concentration. The panoply belonged to a different philosophy. It emerged from a world where individuals still mattered profoundly on the battlefield, where the presence of a single elite warrior could influence outcomes. As warfare shifted toward larger formations and longer engagements, such individual excess lost relevance. The battlefield no longer had room for experiments that demanded perfection from one body. This transition reveals something deeper about innovation itself. Progress is not about pushing limits endlessly. It is about discovering which limits matter. The Dendra panoply tested the upper boundary of protection and found it wanting, not because the armor failed, but because the human frame could not support its promise indefinitely. Modern parallels are easy to find. Even today, military designers grapple with the same dilemma. Add more armor and soldiers tire faster. Increase protection and mobility suffers. Every generation confronts the same question ancient craftsmen faced: how much is enough? The Dendra panoply answered by asking, what if we went all the way? The answer, history suggests, was instructive but final. Its legacy lies not in imitation, but in understanding. It teaches that innovation is not a guarantee of success, that brilliance can coexist with impracticality, that some creations exist not to define the future, but to explore its edges, and in that sense, the panoply succeeded. It expanded the imagination of what ancient societies were capable of. It shattered modern assumptions about Bronze Age limitations. It revealed a culture unafraid to experiment boldly, even recklessly, in pursuit of dominance. The armor also reminds us that disappearance is not the same as failure. Some ideas vanish because they are wrong. Others vanish because the world changes around them. The Dendra panoply belonged to a specific, momentane intersection of wealth, craftsmanship, and martial philosophy that could not be sustained. When that moment passed, the armor had nowhere to go. But its memory endured. Unearthed millennia later, it challenges us again. It forces historians, engineers, and strategists to confront uncomfortable truths about innovation. It asks whether progress is about building the strongest possible solution or the most adaptable one. In warfare, as in life, balance often wins. The panoply rejected balance. It chose commitment. It chose excess. It chose to turn a man into a machine, knowing the cost. That choice did not shape the future, but it illuminated the path others would avoid, and that is its true legacy. The Dendra panoply is unforgettable not because it became the model for what came next, but because it stands alone, a monument to ambition, a relic of a question asked too boldly to ignore. It dared to imagine a future where armor conquered fear entirely. That future never came. But in daring to imagine it, the panoply left us something far more valuable than a blueprint. It left us a lesson that innovation without balance burns bright, burns briefly, and leaves behind echoes powerful enough to survive 3,000 years of silence, pinnacle or dead end. Perhaps it was both. A pinnacle of possibility, a dead end of practicality, and in that contradiction lies its enduring power.